How many ways can you die at work? You can die on a construction site falling from scaffolding without safety measures. You can die in a tank, a liquid collection tank, simply because the safety measures simply did not kick in. You can die going to work, maybe in a car accident or slipping on ice in the winter, hitting your head hard. There are many ways to die, but in no case should anyone ever listen to what a magistrate, specifically the chief prosecutor at the Rome Public Prosecutor's Office, Giovanni De Matteo, said on June 24, 1980. Commenting on an event that happened the morning before, commenting on the murder of a colleague killed at the bus stop. Mario Amato, that's the name of the colleague who died, was killed because he was too zealous. If he hadn't been obsessed with the idea of getting to work on time, he would probably still be alive. Those are chilling words. But how can you say that about a colleague, a man who works a couple of rooms away at a desk and who just wants to get to work on time at 8 in the morning, to start working peacefully and carry out his own task? He basically died because it was his own fault. Because if he had been more accommodating, less strict about work hours, and maybe a little less stubborn in his research, he would have stayed alive. How can you say that? Those are chilling words from Giovanni De Matteo. Those words capture a poisoned atmosphere, the atmosphere that permeated the so-called murky world of Piazzale Clodio in the 1980s. And those are words that show a lack of respect for a magistrate who was shamefully left alone to face something bigger than himself. The man we've already mentioned, Mario Amato, this is his story, his incredible, absurd experience as a servant of the state, left to fend for himself, hindered by his colleagues, and ignored until his tragic death. Our story could begin on June 24, 1980 with De Matteo's statements, or the day before with the ambush at the public transport stop that cost Mario Amato his life. But no, we choose to begin our story on 2 other days in 1980. 2 days perfectly described by a colleague, Mario Di Vito, who published a book a few months ago that I recommend to all of you, Il Nero dei Giorni, published by La Terza. 2 days, March 25 and June 13, 1980. Why these 2 days? Because they coincide with the hearings of Mario Amato before the Superior Council of the Judiciary. Amato is called, along with other colleagues, before the CSM because the atmosphere at Piazza Clodio, at the Rome court, is poisoned. There is something wrong in Rome. There is something that doesn't work. On February 12, 1980-34, deputy public prosecutors signed a letter of protest, a document in which they asked the CSM for an investigation specifically into the Rome office and about that widespread sense of discredit towards the Rome court itself, about the inefficiency and incompetence of those who had been called to lead it. It's a very strong request. It's an investigation that should shake up the Porto delle Nebbie, that should shed light on the inefficiencies. It won't do that. Mario Amato is summoned twice, as we said, on March 25 and June 13. What does Mario Amato say? He denounces it. He denounces the climate in which he is forced to work, an atmosphere of ostracism, or even in some cases open opposition, verbal abuse and obstacles. And he denounces the fact that he was left completely alone. To do what? Mario Amato arrived in Rome in 1977, a few months after the murder of Vittorio Corcio. We already talked about it in another video on the channel. Corcio was that magistrate who was beginning to investigate the murkier aspects of right-wing subversion, on the strange connections between Pierluigi Concutelli, the commander, the executioner, who would kill O. Corcio himself at the beginning of July 1976, and organized crime, the Marseille clan and other associates of his, including Danilo Abruciati, heir Camaleonte, future boss of the Magliana gang. Those dangerous entanglements involving weapons, kidnapping, shootings, and laundered money. They cost O. Corcio his life as he is trying to uncover the truth about another serious secret, that of the P2. O. Corcio found something, but he won't be able to follow up on it. After O. Corcio's death, Mario Amato is called in from Rovereto, a serious professional, an upright man, dedicated to his work. Born in Palermo on November 24, 1937, he made a career in the judiciary and had worked very well in a small prosecutor's office like the one in Rovereto. But he still wanted to move from there, not because he or his family didn't like the quality of life in Trentino, absolutely not, but because he felt he could do much more for the country he loved. Mario Amato would later be portrayed in a completely wrong way, as a socialist, or even worse, a communist, a red robe from Magistratura Democratica. Nothing could be further from the truth. Today we know that Mario Amato had centrist sympathies, we could call them that. He was a moderate, he was an extremely calm person, and not only that, he was a man devoted to his profession and to justice. But when he arrived in Rome in 1977, he was transferred with his position as deputy prosecutor to the office that had belonged to Accorcio, and the chief prosecutor, Giovanni de Matteo, entrusted him with the same cases as Accorcio. These were 600 investigation files already open, but they had to be reviewed from the beginning and investigated further. Amato accepts, but he soon realizes that the task is difficult, almost inhuman. How can you assign 600 investigation files to just one man? Let's keep one thing in mind. In the 1970s, computerization, which is so widespread today, just think about the influence of artificial intelligence, wasn't even imagined. Even just the idea of creating a database, a paper database, or at best a paper one with the first punched cards, was something revolutionary. And that's what Mario Amato asked his superiors for, to create a database. Along with this, he also asked for the help that had already been promised to him when he took office in that department. 2 other deputy prosecutors who could work alongside him and if necessary replace him in the worst cases, such as illness or even worse, death. Several times, Mario Amato requested an audience with De Matteo. Several times, he asked that those promises not remain empty words on paper, but be carried out in an absolute, clear, certain, and undeniable way. Mario Amato keeps receiving only empty promises, but he persistently continues to do his job, to the point that when his shift at Piazzale Clodio ends, often he loads some files into his bag and takes them home to continue working, and he picks them up again the next morning when it's time to go to court. When, on March 25, 1980, Amato is summoned before the CSM, he finds himself facing a decidedly unpleasant scene. He is pointed out by some colleagues as the man who pushed the other 33 deputy public prosecutors to sign that famous complaint document. But there's more. There is a colleague, his name is Antonio Alibrandi, who had it in for Mario Amato. He accuses him of everything. He accuses him of making up investigations. He accuses him of sensationalism. He accuses him of wasting public resources. He accuses him, without mincing words, of being a communist subversive. But why this bitterness? Why doesn't Antonio Alibrandi help a colleague, but instead does everything to hinder him and even insults him in front of other colleagues? The reason is simple. Antonio Alibrandi is the father of Alessandro Alibrandi, known as Ali Baba. He is one of the leaders of the NAR, the Armed Revolutionary Nuclei, a group of young far-right men who grew up idolizing the old Italian social republic. But disillusioned by what had been the season of bombings, the season of right-wing subversion, in collusion with parts of the state, and who had decided to wage war against the state itself. How? Initially targeting police officers and carabinieri, and later magistrates. Antonio Alibrandi defends his son, but he also goes beyond simply defending his son. Because if it's true that Antonio Alibrandi repeatedly intervenes with the judicial police and the criminal investigation branch as well, to get his son released, who is repeatedly stopped in possession of weapons, it's also true that Antonio Alibrandi himself, in the corridors of Palazzo Clodio, does everything he can to delegitimize his colleague Mario Amato, who is the only one in charge of the investigations into the neo-fascist groups in Rome. Mario Amato sees all of this, and he notices it even more when, calling the police chiefs, he gets a disheartened response that it's useless to sign arrest or detention warrants for certain individuals, because within 48, at most 72 hours, they're back on the streets, because there's always someone who calls or has someone call to get them released. Before the CSM, Mario Amato is not a magistrate anyone listens to. He's a magistrate almost under investigation himself, and he experiences all of this and denounces it. He denounces being left alone. He denounces not having anything at his disposal to do his duty. He insists that his superior, Giovanni Di Matteo, provide him with answers, with promises. He insists on being joined by at least one colleague, if not two. That is really the minimum needed to handle those 600 files on Concudeli and more. Mario Amato begs not to be left alone, also because he has already realized that he has become a target. Those guys aren't exactly a bunch of nobodies, but they're armed to the teeth and crazy enough to want to start a very particular revolution, even if it means killing all the servants of the state. Mario Amato knows he's being targeted. That's why he asks for help. He asks for protection. He also asks to be provided with a service car that will pick him up at home and take him back. Then, at the end of his shift, he has already seen terrorists strike in the streets. Not only do his ongoing investigations reveal a decidedly disturbing plan, the attempt by the NAR to seek a sort of tactical alliance with the opposing extremists, those from NAR, those from the left, both want to overthrow the state, one because it is considered too bourgeois and the other because it is seen as rotten from the ground up. So the NAR want to propose to the Red Brigades and Prima Linea that they act jointly, or at least coordinate their actions, simply to destroy the Republic. Red Brigade's members are already shooting in the streets, and so are the NAR, and Mario Amato realizes that he is on the death list. But that car, the one he was entitled to, could never take him to work. Why? Well, hold on tight, because the driver's working hours start at 9 in the morning. Mario Amato starts his work at the courthouse much earlier and needs to be taken to work already at 8. So there's a 60-minute difference between the driver's standard working hours and Mario Amato's needs. He is left alone, not just in the office, but even outside his home. But Mario Amato doesn't give up. Even though on June 13, 1980, 10 days before he was killed, he reported that he was still alone, that he had been delegitimized, that he had no help, not even a driver, not even a security detail. Mario Amato keeps going, he keeps working, and focuses on those profiles. On Giuseppe Valerio Fioravanti, known as Giusba, on Francesca Mambro, on Gilberto Cavallini, on Alessandro Alibrandi. They are in the process of already preparing the Bologna massacre, even though they will continue to proclaim their innocence. But the final verdicts don't lie. It was them. But before going to Bologna, before planting that bomb at the station, before committing that massacre, there was that morning, June 23rd, 1980. Mario Amato leaves his house, says goodbye to his family as always, and has his briefcase with him. And he goes to the bus stop at the intersection of Viale Iono and Via Monte Rocchetta. He is there, alone, just a citizen like many others, while the bus is there waiting. Behind him comes Gilberto Cavallini, one of the young men he was investigating. Cavallini is a different kind of terrorist from the others. He is despised by some neo-fascists, those more tied to the movement's original racism, because he has some African heritage in his DNA. In fact, he is called the Negro because of his dark complexion. But Cavallini, among all of them, is one of the most bloodthirsty, one of the most determined. Cavallini is behind Mario Amato. In a couple of seconds, he pulls out the revolver and, without placing it against the back of Mario Amato's head, fires a shot directly at his head. He doesn't even have time to realize what happened, and his body quickly collapses on the sidewalk. People around start screaming. Cavallini is already gone. Nearby, there's a motorcycle with the engine running. At the handlebars is Luigi Ciavardini, another very young NAR member. Ciavardini is still a minor. He's Cavallini's accomplice. He picks him up on the back seat, and they speed away at full throttle. Mario Amato has been murdered. It is confirmed by Cavallini himself over the phone to Giusva Fioravanti, who at that moment is on the run together with his partner Francesca Mambro. They celebrate, toast with champagne, and eat oysters. They have taken out their worst enemy, the man who was investigating their secrets. He could have discovered what they were preparing. He could have found out something too inconvenient for them and their comrades. But the story of Mario Amato does not end here. It doesn't end with those bullets. It doesn't end with the blood that stains the waiting area in the middle of the crowd. It doesn't end with the sheet that covers him there on the sidewalk stained with blood. No, it doesn't end there. It has repercussions. The next day, Prosecutor General de Matteo makes those outrageous statements. Mario Amato was too zealous. He insisted on being at work before everyone else. He didn't want to wait for the service car, which couldn't pick him up before 9. So he was asking for it. He died because it was his own fault. But like a servant of the state who was forced to work alone in an office by himself, without help, without colleagues, he begged for other colleagues to work with. He begged for a database to be created within the court. That man had dedicated his life to the state. He brought it upon himself, that man who died before he was even 43, alone, abandoned by everyone. He brought it upon himself. Those words from De Matteo cause a scandal, but they also stir something up. The death of Mario Amato triggers a real upheaval within the Rome prosecutor's office, because from that moment on, it was decided to form a task force like the one that would later be created for anti-mafia investigations, like the one already envisioned in Turin against the Red Brigades. A task force of magistrates working exclusively on right-wing terrorism, and later on left-wing terrorism as well, on subversive activity, bombings, attacks, and everything surrounding them. The methods change, the way of working changes. But was Mario Amato's death necessary for all this to happen? No, it would have been enough if someone had listened to Mario Amato's cries for help, if someone had paid attention to him, if someone in Rome at Piazzale Clodio and at the CSM had listened, if they hadn't underestimated the warnings given by that man, that alone would have been enough. Maybe if Mario Amato had been listened to, if Mario Amato hadn't been left alone, if Mario Amato had been supported by colleagues, if he had been given access to a database, and of course, if he had been given a security detail, and maybe we wouldn't have had the Bologna massacre, maybe many victims of the NAR would not have died, maybe the NAR themselves would have been dismantled in a short time. But we can't know that. Today, because of the blindness of some, the stubbornness and obstinacy of others, and even personal grudges, including those of Antonio Librandi, Mario Amato was hindered. He was prevented from working, or his work was made much more difficult, to the point of leaving him completely isolated, to the point of leaving him to die alone on that sidewalk. This is an all-too Italian story, a story of how Italy celebrates its fallen as heroes. But sometimes it does nothing to help them while they're alive. It isolates them, mocks them, avoids helping them in any way, but then dedicates monuments, streets, squares, stamps to them. But what's the point? What's the point, I ask you, of doing all this for a person who could have easily been saved, who could have been helped, who could have given so much to our justice? What's the point of doing it afterwards, when it's all over, after blood has been shed? What's the point? If you answer me that it makes no sense, I agree with you. It's true, it makes no sense. But we're in Italy, the country where warning signs are ignored, the country where protest letters go unanswered, a country where cries for help fall on deaf ears, a country where a magistrate, just for doing his duty, is labeled as too zealous, stubborn. He was said to have brought it on himself when his body had just been taken to the morgue. And he's portrayed like this, not by some extremist, some madman, or some drunk, not by some drunk who had one too many. No, he's described like this by his former boss, who did nothing to prevent all this, but who maybe was just looking for an easy way out. To avoid admitting his own responsibilities, to avoid admitting that maybe the first person responsible for Amato's murder was actually him, not the judge, but the boss himself.